Land Acknowledgement. The city of Hamilton, where I record this podcast, is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was a nation-to-nation agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. This land is also covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase of 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Hamilton is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and I recognize I must do more to learn and acknowledge the rich history of this land so that I can better understand my role as a settler, as well as a neighbor, partner, and caretaker. I also stand in solidarity with the murdered and missing Indigenous women, girls, transgender, and two-spirited people, and all those who seek justice on their behalf. Miigwech. Thank you. Welcome to the arena, where sometimes the hardest part is showing up. My name is Linda McLaughlin. Thank you for being here. Natalie Esparza is a young, queer, Hispanic woman with a very bright future. She's about to publish her first book, which is full of lessons of her relatively young life. A trigger warning for listeners, as we will be discussing bullying and suicide. Thank you for listening. This is episode 27. Thank you so much for doing this. I appreciated you sending me the PDF version of your book. It was great, and I related to it so much.
I love it.
Great job. Great job.
Thank you.
I have my traditional little intro, as I do for everybody. In fact, I thought I would read part of the author's note because I think it's such a powerful jumping off point for your book. Natalie Esparza, you're a sister and daughter. You have a communications background, and you're a coach. You are about to be a published author. Your book, Spectacle, is about your journey as a young queer woman wrestling with taboo subjects such as sexuality, religion, financial status, and mental health, and wondering why you didn't fit into the conventional understanding of the world. And from the author's note in your book, I wonder why it is so easy to cling to what we know, even if it causes us harm. Change can feel so dangerous that we'd rather uphold the status quo than do the hard work to examine our lives. But 2020 shed light on the cost of neglecting our growth. This book is meant to encourage you to respond to uncertainty with curiosity as a tool for self-care. I've wanted to write this book for a long time, but didn't have the guts to start until now. The events of 2020 pushed me out of my comfort zone in so many ways, and I'm sure they did the same for you. If you are struggling to find clarity in your life, coping with trauma, or feel like you're being pulled in too many directions at once, then this book is for you. Maybe you were told a successful life only fits some containers, and none of them look appealing to you. But you don't know if it's possible to break out of what you know. You're nervous about what your family and friends might think, or how it might feel to leave the safety of anonymity. You might feel this ache of life you could be living if you just let go of others' opinions. This book is here to help you wield curiosity, to start living the version of your life you've been dreaming about. If you're ready to face your imposter syndrome, find your voice, and dance with your fear, this one is for you. Welcome to the arena, Natalie.
Thank you. It was funny hearing it back and realizing I wrote that. Yeah, especially because it goes through so many edit versions, and I'm really proud of it.
How does it feel to be that close to having it published and ready to be on bookshelves and in people's hands?
Absolutely surreal. I always thought I was going to write a book when I was at least 30. And so I was waiting until I felt competent enough. And ever since the Emerging Leaders program with Seth Godin, I started having the courage to pursue things that felt so out of reach before. And so to finally be at the end of this is really fulfilling because the journey's been difficult. I can't believe I wrote what I wrote in such a short amount of time, but I started right after the program in June or July of last year, 2020.
Wow. How would you describe the way that you've written the book?
Each chapter is its own vignette, but it's chronological. And I share an event or a collection of events that are related in a chapter, and I actually have coaching questions at the end of each chapter.
Yeah, which is a really interesting way to be able to get a dialogue going. I related to the first chapter that I read around religion and what's talked about, what's not talked about, those taboo subjects. I remember as a young person wanting to be able to ask questions in church. Why can't I enter into a dialogue with the priest about what he's putting forward as the truth?
Yeah, I think personally, I grew up religious, but I am no longer affiliated to a single religion right now. And some people might assume that most people that walk away are being lazy or just want to sin or whatever. And actually, I read the Bible front to back multiple times, and I wrestled with these questions, and I tried to ask them in multiple churches. And it was just this trend of being shut down.
Take me back to conversations around the dinner table when you were growing up. What did that look like?
Yeah, when I was younger, we used to eat around a table, and then it started migrating actually to the couch. And after a while, we always ate there, but it was always family time. We actually always had a dedicated time. We normally ate around 6 or 7 o'clock with the whole family. And my sister and I would trade off meal nights. So everyone in the family cooked dinner at least once a week. And if it wasn't a conversation, it was often watching either a show together or something educational. And if it was a conversation, it was either sharing about our day or sharing what we were learning next. It was often centered around just interesting subjects, and I really appreciated that.
What event in your life has had the most profound impact on you?
I can think of a few, and all of them are in the book, but I think one that really sticks with me is fairly tragic. I was in my freshman and sophomore year is connected. So my freshman year of high school, I met this person the first day and became his friend. And then it dawned on me that the whole school didn't really like him for some reason. I think he was just had a lisp and didn't get social cues and all of that. So we went from friends to becoming a bully. And I actually had been bullied in middle school for years. And so it was interesting to become the thing I hated. And so that went on for all of freshman year. And then the first day of sophomore year, he came in to choir class and he had highlights. He had dyed his hair. And for high schoolers, it's very unusual. So we were making fun of him, and we were in the back of the class and he was in the front of the class, and we thought he couldn't hear us. And then the bell rang and he turned around and met my eyes with tears in his eyes. And I knew that he had heard me. And at that moment, I had this gut feeling that as a high school girl, you're more interested sometimes in popularity than apologizing to the kid that no one likes. But I had this gut feeling that I needed to apologize. Actually, it was right after that, the bell rang. And so I was like, the bell just rang, everyone's leaving. I will apologize tomorrow. But I promised myself that I would. And so I got there early and he wasn't there, and we started class. And then an administrator came in and told us he had committed suicide that night.
Oh, Natalie.
Yeah. And it took a while to understand that it wasn't my fault. But that gut feeling comes up since that event, and I make sure to listen to it. But that also changed my view of like humanity and mortality. I think I started to understand that my actions mattered, and being maybe not necessarily selfish, but self-centered, like not really worrying how I was affecting people wasn't how I wanted to live in the future. And I knew what bullying felt like, and yet I had been doing it to someone else. And I actually went to his funeral, and it was the first funeral I'd ever gone to, and it was open casket, and that's what sobered me, was seeing him there.
Wow. I'm trying to process that
I know.
as a 55-year-old woman, never mind a whatever you would have been 15, 16, 17 years old. Have somebody die that's your own age, never mind taking their life. And
Yeah, I was about 15. And I think I knew death as like an abstract concept, but I'd never had even a pet die, let alone a human being. And man, that was something that just stuck with me. It's still with me, but it stuck with me through probably all of high school, just wrestling with that.
how did it impact? As a bully, more often than not, you're with others, especially in high school. It tends to be something that's done in groups or as a result of wanting to fit into a group. And how did it affect the others that were around you? Did it have the same impact?
It seemed to, because pretty much all of us attended his funeral. And that was interesting to, I think it just hit everyone. And we realized, I think in high school, your brain's just not fully developed. And so you don't have a full concept of life from beginning to end. And so we would go to class and it would feel really empty because he was always the loudest one in the room. And yeah, I think everyone was really shell-shocked for probably the rest of high school. And I don't remember another kid taking his place, if that makes sense.
What does living a courageous life mean to you?
This is an interesting question because for me, it came up as a double-edged sword, both grit and self-care. Grit, keeping going when things get tough and sometimes taking stuff on the chin, but it's equally courageous to ask for help. It can be so easy to try and white-knuckle things and be an island or try to be. And even for me, some of the most courageous things I've done is things like therapy and finally taking medication for mental health because it's so stigmatized. And I always was taught, even by my family without too much judgment, that it was a last resort, not a first thing that you do. So all of those. So grit and self-care, but also leaning into curiosity, because often it's admitting that there's something that you don't know, and people often aren't willing to do that. They don't want to risk their previously held narratives to ask questions. So I guess it's three things: curiosity, grit, and self-care.
How do you continue to grow?
I think my answer a year ago to this question would just be learning, like picking stuff up, watching YouTube videos, watching documentaries, stuff like that. And that was true a year ago. But I think now, especially, it's things like writing a book or joining a new social group or something, because there's a huge unknown. At least with learning, I feel like you have a little bit more control over what's going on. But in your house or apartment, on a computer versus, especially with the book, having editors look at it and being vulnerable and having them tell you to cut or add something. And Seth Godin talks about dips. And I don't think I'd experienced dips until I really wrote the book, because there were several times I literally wanted to walk away. And my rational side of my head was like, what? You want to do this. You've been building up to this. You have worked so hard on this. Why do we want to walk away? And it was because I was terrified to be vulnerable and publish stuff. So getting out of my comfort zone, but also having compassion that it's going to be messy. Because one of the things I struggle most with is patience and control. I want to know what's coming up ahead of me, and I want to know all of the moving pieces. And when I don't, my anxiety is triggered. So I have to have the compassion that it's not going to be a straight line. And I might just try a bunch of things, and that's okay, even though I feel like society often tells us to specialize.
So just going back for a second, you talked about the dip, Seth Godin's, how he's talked about that. And it's about those moments where you start to get that resistance, where you start to second guess yourself and you're having that moment of anxiety. It's working through that. It's understanding that's a part of the process and that things will start to turn around and naturally start to work again in your favor. But you've got to sit through the shit to get to the other side. She's smiling and nodding at me. Linda's version of what Seth said.
Yes, both at a small scale and a larger scale. I didn't think I was going to share about this, but 2020 affected all of us. And speaking of sitting in the shit, my partner has been job searching for almost 2 years now. And so I'm the sole breadwinner.
Wow.
And we've been doing couples therapy, and the main subject is sitting in the shit together, because there is no plan. It's just the plan is taking the next step. And so, yeah, if there's ever a lesson in dips, it's this. And interestingly enough, I think we finally hit a stride, which I was never expecting. But yeah.
For me, it's having faith, right? Life is, and the way society is structured, it's very much centered around certainty.
Yes.
And wanting to know, and I need to know what the next step is. I need to know what's coming next. And you're not going to. So you may as well just sit in faith and believe that what you need next will come. But it's a difficult one. What's essential to living a courageous life?
The very first thing that popped into my head was actually community. And so that surprised me. In 2016, I was in the middle of college, and I transferred from a community college to a university. And from 2016 to 2018, I was actually very depressed. And I wasn't very courageous. I was just existing and trying to survive. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that I was struggling to find a community. And any community I did find seemed to want to shut me down. I tried church, I tried different clubs, I was a resident assistant, and it seemed like just being myself wasn't good enough for anyone. And so I started to take it personally, and I thought there was something wrong with me. And so I just became a hermit and watched TV and ate food and gained a lot of weight, as you do in college sometimes. And so I know it's tangential, but you asked what is essential for living a courageous life. And like I said, community, because I think getting all those different perspectives really helps push you forward. And I think the best community I've found so far is actually the Akimbo community, because you're actively interacting with people each week if you go to the different Zoom meetings, and you just get exposure to different ways of thinking that you wouldn't if you didn't have that. And a lot of the things I've had the courage to do, like writing a book, came from being in a Zoom breakout room and someone asking me, are you ready to start writing next week? And then telling me about the program. I think if they weren't there, I probably wouldn't have had the courage to actually seek out something to start writing.
It's interesting. Courage in some respects seems solitary. Perhaps making the initial decision to do something is your own, but having that support network around you in whatever form it comes is incredibly important, because it can build you up or tear you down, depending on which community you happen to be a part of. What impact do you want to leave on the world?
Ever since I was little, I wanted to be an author. And so fulfilling that dream is really interesting, because when I was little and I was bullied, books were my safe haven. I would always go to the library and I'd be safe there. Another self-care tool has been podcasting. So I just feel like my love language is words of affirmation. And so words just are like an anchor point for me. So speaking of impact, I think I just want to be able to be the person I didn't have when I was younger. Not to say I didn't have heroes or mentors, but especially as an LGBT woman, as a Hispanic woman, as someone who has come out of a religious capacity in the South, I want to be someone that other people can look to and realize they can also pursue their own life outside of other people's expectations, because it's really difficult to do on your own. And it's sometimes really nice to have someone like a role model, someone, oh, if she did it, I can do it too. And I want to help coach other women 18 to 35 to be able to do that. And especially around boundaries and clarity, I think we really struggle with standing up for ourselves, being direct, and knowing ourselves enough to have that clarity. We're too worried about what other people think or how they're going to react.
Mm-hmm. What on earth are you going to do next? You're relatively young and you are about to achieve one of your life's goals. For many people, myself included, a big bucket list goal of being a published author?
I think that's something I'm thrashing about right now. Speaking of clarity and control. And it's interesting because I do this journaling exercise where I'm asking myself that same gut feeling, like, what's next? And my dad and I had a conversation about that recently where that was always a mantra of our family. We were always moving to the next thing. And so I find it really difficult to sit and wonder and give myself some space to figure things out. And I have some goals. So I'm actually in the small business workshop right now for Akimbo. I would really like to run my own business, but that feels like a really big beast that for some reason I'm just very scared of. And I really want to create a course. And the publisher that is publishing my book is doing a beta testing of publishing courses. And so I may be doing that starting in the fall. We'll see. But it's just really odd that it was something that was also on my bucket list last year. And then they're like, oh, we're doing this beta testing. And I was like, okay, I'm interested. And I don't know if this is on the horizon or not, but there were book coaches for this program I'm in. And I've already expressed interest in that, especially around personal branding and LinkedIn, helping these authors that come after me market their books. All of the book coaches were amazing, but that was one thing that we weren't really taught, and I happen to know how to do already. And then maybe becoming an Akimbo coach sometime in the future.
There you go. It sounds like you have a great list, and it sounds like those opportunities are coming forward to you as much as you are seeking them out.
Yeah. So there's a lot of unknown. I don't know what order I'm going to do things, but I have this net of like possibility. Oh, and then the book tour. So my publisher is going to have me do that.
Right.
And securing speaking engagements and stuff, which I am terrified for, but I'm going to prepare for and do. And they really want me to consider doing a TEDx talk. And
yeah, I can see that.
So that's another thing on the horizon I'm so scared for, but that's what Courage is all about, right?
Number one on many people's list is public speaking is the scariest things to do. But I have every confidence that you can tackle that. No problem. Just do like you did with the book. Just break it down, work through it, work on it, and suddenly you can do it.
Yeah, so, thank you.
I wanted to ask you who were or who are your heroes that you drew upon growing up or as you emerged through some of these experiences that you had?
I think it's drastically changed in the last 2 years because growing up, I just never knew exactly what I wanted. And so it's interesting. It's not a bad thing, but it's interesting that it was always like older white men that were my heroes. It didn't have to be, but so like Seth Godin or Rob Bell and they still are on my list. However, people like Hannah Gatsby and Glennon Doyle and Elizabeth Gilbert and Brené Brown are recent additions. And most of those are queer women. And I didn't know that always at the time, but they're just fierce and often either are public speakers or authors or both. And I feel like they're modeling who I want to be. Like, I don't want to be exactly like them, but I want to be one of them. And I read Untamed right before I started writing this book, and I was nervous because it sounded so, like the ideas were so similar to what I wanted to write about. Mm-hmm. And Cassandra Speaks by Elizabeth Lesser. That book was really interesting because it's all about when women add to like our history, the story changes. And so all of the women's voices that are lacking in our history are still important. And because they're not always included, women today don't feel included in society, and their voices are not always heard or believed.
What would you do on your last day?
It's a good question. Definitely want to spend time with loved ones, my partner and my family. Other than that, it's hazy. I think I would want to feel some sun on my face and eat good food. And maybe reminisce. And I don't know what else. I think I'll keep it simple.
Fair enough. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I'm just excited to speak about curiosity because a lot of people I've told about the book, like maybe a one-liner is, oh, everyone needs curiosity, or why do you think people aren't curious right now? Like they think that it's a pretty unanimous trait to have. But digging into this book, it seems like there's gatekeeping on curiosity, whether it's external or internal. And again, that risking a previously held narrative or admitting that there's something you don't know is often really difficult. Or you've been taught not to talk about mental health or politics or religion, either in public or even at home. And there were some things in my life that would have gotten a lot better if we talked about even things like sexuality in like a holistic way, because there's something like 17 states that have medically accurate sex ed in schools. It's interesting that there's all these things that are happening, but we're not talking about it. So I hope my book encourages us to start having those conversations. So I think if the last couple of years have taught us anything, if we start actually having those difficult conversations, maybe we won't be so divided.
Good luck with all your media and everything else you're working on.
Thank you.
Natalie chose a great quote by Elizabeth Gilbert, which I thought I'd share. The most interesting moment of a person's life is what happens to them when all their certainties go away. Then who do you become? And then what do you look for? That is the moment when the universe is offering up an invitation saying, "Come and find me." I look forward to receiving Natalie's book in the coming weeks and to seeing what else she does with her life. Thank you for listening. Please follow or subscribe to this podcast. And if you feel someone else might benefit from listening to this episode, please share it. Leave a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcasts. I invite you to follow my blog, where I continue to explore how to show up more courageously. Visit my website at www.lindamclaughlin.com. I look forward to sharing my next guest's story. Her work examining family constellations as it related to the concept of whiteness caught my attention recently. It will be a challenging conversation, but important. Until next time, my name is Linda McLaughlin in The Arena.